Trust me when I say, this video has been a long time coming for me. Hello everyone and welcome to another Rewind review. In this video we are taking a look at a cult classic, and that is the original live action adaptation of The Crow. Released in 1994 and based on the comic of the same name, The Crow tells the story of Eric Draven, a man who is brutally murdered but comes back to life as an undead avenger of his and his fiance's murder. Directed by Alex Proyas and written by David J. Sho and John Shirley, the movie stars Brandon Lee, Michael Wincott, Ernie Hudson, Rochelle Davis, Bei Ling, Sophia Shinas, Tony Todd and Anna Thompson. Okay, confession time. Up until last week, I had never actually seen this movie before, but it's one of those movies that I have always wanted to watch. It's one of my dad's favourite movies. I know a lot of people who absolutely love it. I'm fully aware of the cult status that it has, as well as the fan base that it's garnered over the years. So when I say that this video has been a long time coming, I genuinely mean it. In fact, when I started this channel, one of the first things that I did was I developed a spreadsheet with all these different movies that I wanted to actually cover while I was doing this channel. There were movies that I have seen before many times that I wanted to talk about, as well as a load of movies that I'd never seen before. And when it came to actually putting down names of film titles on that spreadsheet, this was one of the first ones that I put on it. But the reason why I held off on doing this video for as long as I have is because I wanted to make sure that I was confident enough on camera before actually doing this video. And in the words of Ra's al Ghul, I am ready. And also, coincidentally, because I'd waited so long to actually do this video is actually going out in the same year that this movie is celebrating its 30th anniversary, which actually meant that a lot of cinemas around the UK and my local cinema was actually playing it. And I thought, you know what, let's go and see it in the way that it's intended to be seen. So I can officially say that my first time watching this movie was on the big screen, and it was packed as well. So I suppose the only question that I need to answer now is, was it worth the wait? And in my opinion, I think it was. The Crow follows a poetic guitarist called Eric Draven who gets brutally murdered along with his fiancée Shelley on Devil's Night. 1 year later, Eric is revived by a crow which guides him through the land of the living and leads him to his killers. Now turned vigilante with newfound supernatural powers, Eric uses these skills to give those thugs a taste of their own medicine in his pursuit of vengeance. The Crow is a straight-up revenge thriller with the entire premise surrounding Eric's quest to kill the people who murdered both him and his fiancée. And despite the supernatural angle, it is still a pretty straightforward and simple plot. I will say I was expecting a little bit more to actually happen within the overall story, but I do appreciate that this movie does try and keep it as simplified as possible. It does focus on the important stuff first and foremost, and it doesn't really mess around either. I mean, the film literally opens right after the murders have taken place, and it jumps straight into the actual plot of this movie, which I really did like overall. The only real complaint that I've got with the overall story is that there are some elements that are introduced in this movie that don't really get as much focus as I think that they really should do. There's some character motivations that feel a little bit rushed or skimmed over. There's some elements that I don't think are really explained properly and could have done with a little bit more attention. I know there is a longer version of this movie that does exist out there. I don't know whether it's a director's cut or something like that, or if it's just a compilation of deleted scenes. The movie as is about 1 hour 40 minutes long. That's the theatrical version that I saw, and the extended version is about 2 hours, so maybe a lot of the stuff that is skimmed over or could have done with a little bit more attention actually does get a bit more focus in that version. And in terms of the basic story that this movie is trying to tell, it is a story that has been done many times over the years, but I think The Crow does have a little bit more of an edge to some of them. What helps The Crow stand out from a lot of other very similar movies, even ones coming out today, is a mixture of the visuals, the style and cinematography, the performances, the sometimes poetic dialogue, and that awesome soundtrack. It's memorable and it lingers in your mind. And as I said, one part of this movie that really does stand out, and one aspect that I really did like about it, is the performances from the actors. And leading the show as Eric Draven is Brandon Lee. But first, look, there's no way that I can do this video without mentioning what happened to him. As many people know, The Crow was Brandon Lee's final performance after he was accidentally shot and killed during the production. I don't want to linger too much on this. I don't want this video to just be about what happened, but what I will say is that it genuinely was a tragedy what happened, especially with this movie potentially being his big break. There's no telling what he would have gone on to do, what movies he would have made, and it is a genuine shame that we never got to see another performance from him. Based on everything I know about Brandon Lee behind the scenes, he was a dedicated and passionate person who really put his all into this to make it the best it could possibly be. And as I said, it is a genuine tragedy what happened, and it is an honest shame that he never got the chance to do more. As for Brandon Lee's performance in this movie, he is brilliant. He really throws himself into this role, capturing the essence of this character well by balancing out the drama and occasional bit of humour. His movements are really good, how he walks, how he holds himself, how acrobatic he is, and I like the decision for him to always crouch whenever he's on buildings overlooking the environment. It looks cool, it gives him this animalistic presence whenever he's on screen, and it reminds me quite a lot of what it was that Christian Bale did with his version of Batman in the Dark Knight trilogy. I was actually quite surprised, given how moody and how unhinged he can be in this movie, that he can be sometimes quite funny and quite playful as well. But it does make sense considering that this is a character that can't actually be killed. Like, when he gets brought back to life, he's basically brought back to be immortal. He gets shot, he gets stabbed, and he keeps on going. He just can't be killed off whatsoever. So I do understand that there is an element of cockiness that does come out through his performance as the movie goes on, which I did like, and I do think that it is handled really well. I think my favourite bit is during this sequence in an apartment where he gets shot through the hand and he's like pretending, he's like sort of screaming in agony, and then he just turns around, shows him what's happening, and starts cackling as his hand heals up. I just love that scene. That is part of the reason why Brandon Lee's performance in this movie is so good, because he can play every aspect of this character really well, and he understands his character fully. It's a little bit of Eric Draven's personality from before he and Shelley were murdered, and I like how that is utilised throughout the movie. It makes him feel, even though he is this immortal being now with all these amazing superpowers, he does still feel human. I was a little taken aback by how poetic he can be whenever he talks, but again, it makes sense based on Eric's backstory, and the dialogue itself, while sometimes a bit cheesy, is pretty memorable. I absolutely love his on-screen presence. I love the design of the character. I know that that is a look that basically every single badass character from like the early 2000s and late 90s was all sort of using, like Neo and Blade and Selene from Underworld. But he looks so cool in this movie, especially combined with the scruffy looking hair that he's got and the face paint that he wears. He looks amazing. That little sequence of him entering into the apartment through the window with the trench coat, with the hair covering his eyes and clutching the electric guitar, that is just gorgeous. Apparently what it is that Brandon Lee actually did when it comes to the makeup that the Crow actually wears throughout this movie, what it is that he did is he would actually apply it the day before filming. He would go home with it, he would sleep with it on, and then he would come in the following day and it would look a lot more worn down, a little bit more natural. And I think that the idea behind that was really good, and I think that it does look so much better because of it. I will say, I don't think there ever actually is an explanation for why it is that he does wear the face paint throughout this movie. I know it is based on a mask that he does have in his apartment, but I don't think there's ever actually a proper reason given for why it is that he does choose to sport that look before going out as the Crow. I think there is a reason given for it within the comic books. I haven't actually read the comics myself, as you probably guessed, but in terms of the actual movie itself, I don't think there ever actually is a proper explanation for it. I initially thought going into this movie that the reason why he wears the makeup in the first place was because it was going to be what he was wearing on the night that he was murdered, and he wants the criminals, the killers, to see that face. He wants that face to be the last thing that they see before they die. But that's not what happens. It looks cool overall, especially combined with the overall look of the character, but as I said, I would have liked a little bit more of an explanation for it. Brandon Lee honestly made for a good lead in this movie. I love what he does with this character, and I like the brief flashes of his life before becoming the Crow because it helps humanise him more. He is genuinely fantastic in this movie, and I am so glad that he was cast. I'll admit, I was a little bit surprised actually seeing Ernie Hudson in this movie. I didn't know that he was in this. I really like him in this as Sergeant Albrecht. I think that his performance is really good and grounded. He's likeable, he can be funny, I like how he's integrated into the story, and I quite enjoyed his uneasy partnership with Eric and how that develops over the course of the movie. And the same goes for Rochelle Davis as Sarah. She doesn't have a huge role in the overall story, but she does have a personal connection to Eric because she is somebody who both Eric and Shelley looked after. So in that regards, I do like what the character does add, and I think that Rochelle's performance is good overall. I do think that we could have done with maybe a few more flashbacks to do kind of show her relationship established with Eric and Shelley, maybe like how it is that they actually met, because that is one of the elements that they don't really address in this movie. They just kind of gloss over it and just say that they looked after her, which I do understand because that is the thing that is most important about her character and her connection to Eric, but I would have liked a little bit more development there. But even so, as I said, I do like what the character does add to the overall story and Eric's backstory. I like that both she and her mother, played by Anna Thompson, help show that Eric is still human and a good person and not just consumed with vengeance. because there are some really good sequences where you actually do see him actually helping them. I don't think that it's a necessary thing that needs to be in this movie. I think that Eric's quest for revenge is interesting enough on its own, but at the same time, I do think that it does work overall, and I do like that it is included. The thing that I was a little bit split on in this movie is the main antagonist, and that's a character called Top Dollar, played by Michael Wincott. While I think that the character's presence is pretty intimidating overall, and Michael's performance is really good, with a really epic voice, I will say he does come across as a bit two-dimensional. There's not a lot to him in terms of character outside of his use of swords and the weird relationship with his eye-loving half-sister Micah, played by Bei Ling. That was just strange. I mean, it's not as disturbing as Game of Thrones, but it is up there. I do like that he does provide a threat to Eric, and there is some level of respect that he does have for him, but they don't do enough with the character, and there isn't much of a rivalry built up between them either. Eric's entire beef is with the thugs that killed his fiancé. He barely seems to really acknowledge Top Dollar until the finale, so I definitely think that they could have done a little bit more there, or established a little bit more of a rivalry between them. They could have done something quite similar to what it is that they did in the Thomas Jane Punisher movie, where you could have had Eric basically setting out to just destroy anything and everything that Top Dollar has established and the empire that he's built up, and then eventually go after him. Just have him slowly taking everything away from him to the point where he starts becoming quite desperate and starts sending people after him. And I think that that could have worked really well. But as it is fine, and I think that the threat that both he and his sister pose to Eric is good enough. And when it comes to everyone else that appears in this movie, I think that what everyone has done with their own individual roles is really good overall. The gang are quite varied and entertaining, with some giving very subtle and grounded performances like Lawrence Mason and the legend himself Tony Todd, and others are a little bit more over the top and cartoonish like Michael Massey, David Patrick Kelly and Angel David. I will say I did like John Polito in this movie. I thought that his scenes were quite enjoyable. I will say I would have liked a little bit more from Sophia Shinas as Shelley. I get why it is that she only has a small part in this movie, but I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of her relationship with both Eric and Sarah. But again, as is, I think that what we do see within the movie does work overall, and I think that maybe adding a lot more of it might have distracted from the actual plot. There are some really good performances in this movie overall, but by far the best ones are from Ernie Hudson and Brandon Lee. Outside of the performances, some of the most memorable aspects of this movie are the visuals and overall style. As I said from the very beginning of this movie, it jumps straight into the main plot, and one of the first things that does grab you are the visuals. This is a visually arresting movie, and I don't think that's a phrase that I've ever actually used on this channel before, but we're going to go with it because it is accurate. It's just dripping, quite literally, because it rains almost the entire runtime, even though it can't rain all the time, in dark and gothic imagery, not too dissimilar from what it is that Tim Burton did with his Batman movies. The cinematography is very artistic, its framing is fantastic, and I love how they use colours or don't use colours. Now, as I said, I haven't read the comics, so I don't know how close visually this is to those pages, but there are shots and sequences that are literal works of art. There are sequences that look like paintings and comic book panels. It looks fantastic, it feels atmospheric, and you can't look away. I will admit, because of how dark and prominent the shadows can be and how bright the lights can be, I think this movie could potentially work as a black and white movie. I mean, in some sequences, it almost is. I mean, you'd miss out on those absolutely dazzling sunset sequences, but it would still look good. That is something that really did stand out to me, the lighting and the overall use of shadows. It really helps emphasise the gothic atmosphere that this movie does have, and it does help aid in some of the best looking sequences. And I'm actually quite happy that even though this is a movie that does have quite dark imagery and all the characters are wearing quite dark clothes throughout most of the film, you can still see everything. That is a problem that a lot of modern day movies have, where it's so dark that you just can't see what's going on. This does not have that problem. You can see everything and it looks fantastic. And one thing that really does help this movie look as good as it does is how real it is. This is a pretty practical movie overall. It uses a mixture of real sets, it uses miniatures, it uses a combination of wirework and stunts, it uses a mixture of green screen and projections to merge everything together, and it looks really good overall. The actual design of the sets and the characters are really well crafted and help showcase the gothic style and moody tone well. And because it isn't exactly established when or where this takes place, with the overall design of everything, it does have a timeless quality that helps it hold up. I mean, there are definitely a few things here and there that are very much from the 90s era, but at the same time, it does maintain that timeless quality. Even when it comes to a lot of the effects that they do use within this movie, I do think that most of them do hold up fairly well. And that includes things like how they blur together miniatures and real-world sets. I think that that works really well overall. I will say some composition shots, like Eric getting shot through the hand and you can see the hole, isn't perfect and it is slightly dated. I mean, it holds up better than that sequence in Back to the Future, but those shots are really fast, and especially the shots of the city, they actually suit the style of the film quite well. It helps give Eric and the actual crow this otherworldly presence, and it allows for some of the most creative imagery, and that includes how Eric's abilities are handled. It is quite subtle how his powers are presented throughout this movie, but it is quite effective overall, and because it is done in a much more practical way, it does mean that they do hold up quite well. This actually shows my knowledge of the character. Before seeing this movie, I wasn't aware of what powers he actually does possess. The first time that I actually did clock on the fact that he actually does have some sort of abilities of some kind is when I saw the trailer for the 2024 movie where he's able to like heal himself and he can't die. But I do like what it is that he can do, and I like how it is presented on screen, especially the crow vision. I don't really know what to call that, but it does look really cool overall. But I will admit that based on the trailer for the 2024 movie and what it is that I knew this story was going to be about, the revenge aspect of it, I thought this movie was going to be an absolute gore fest. But you know what? It actually isn't that bad. It does have its moments here and there where it can get quite brutal, but you don't really see too much. It's one of those movies that kind of leaves it more to your imagination of what it is that's actually happening. It's one of those films that cuts away before anything too graphic happens. So of course, with this movie getting re-released for its 30th anniversary, the BBFC, who give age certificates to movies in the UK, have decided to revisit this film. And initially, when this movie was first released in cinemas, it was rated an 18, and up until now it has always been an 18. But with the re-release, it's been downgraded to a 15 certificate, which for once I actually do agree with. It is a violent film, it does have plenty of action, but there's nothing too graphic in this movie, so if you are somebody who is a little bit squeamish and you don't like seeing too much gore on screen, you will be okay with this one. I like that for the most part it does maintain a gritty and realistic nature. I mean, it does still have that very cartoonish punching sound effect that every comic book movie seems to have. But the action itself is really well staged. The choreography is very good and filled with tension, especially towards the end. And apparently Brandon Lee helped craft the fight choreography as well. The stunt work, again, because this stays practical, is amazing, and there's some really cool moments. Like a tense car chase, the hectic shootout in the gang's hideout, and there's some decent uses of wirework sprinkled throughout too. It's all really good, and I think that they've done an excellent job here. And lastly, I need to talk about the soundtrack from Graham Revell. The actual orchestral soundtrack might not be the greatest soundtrack ever made, but I do think that it does provide a very moody atmosphere, and it does capture the essence of this movie really well. It sets the tone, it sets the mood, and I do think that overall it is really good. And I really like how it does mix together a combination of different musical genres, so you do have the more classic orchestral soundtrack that you would expect from a movie like this, but it also mixes in a lot of grungy rock music and this sort of operatic flair as well. It's the right style for The Crow, it matches the tone and atmosphere really well, and I do think that overall it is a good soundtrack. That being said, the most memorable musical moments in this movie are the songs. The song choices are excellent, and the way that they are used throughout this movie is brilliant. There's stuff from Rage Against the Machine, there's stuff from Stone Temple Pilots, there's some great stuff in here. Standout songs for me include things like Burn from The Cure, which is actually one of the first songs that I ever heard from this movie. And I'll be honest, when I first heard that song, I actually thought that it was going to be played during like the finale of the movie. I thought that it was going to be the song that plays just leading into the credits, and it was going to play over the initial credit sequence. So I was quite surprised actually hearing when this song actually does get played. And I do think that it does suit that sequence really well. The other standout song for me is Dead Souls by Nine Inch Nails. That sequence of Eric racing across the rooftops, discovering his powers, all in the rain, the visuals that you are seeing is absolutely beautiful, all matched with that song playing in the background. It is absolutely perfect. I need to mention though, and I'm not quite sure why I always thought this, but for some reason I was convinced that In the Shadows by the Rasmus was going to be in this movie. For some reason I always associated that song with this movie based on the music video and the style. Maybe it's in the sequels, I don't know. They really did pick the right songs to be featured in this movie, and I do think that overall the soundtrack is really good. It's definitely worth a listen to if you have never heard it before. I would highly recommend it. Overall, this honestly was a great film. It's not flawless, and there are elements that do get a little bit glossed over or not really explained, but overall it is a really good and entertaining film that is really well made. It looks amazing, it sounds great, and the performances from everyone involved are really good overall. Some effects are, yes, admittedly a little dated, but as I said, because of the decision to keep this practical, it does mostly still hold up. And given the ambiguous setting and designs, it does have a timeless quality. I love the cast and what everyone does with their roles, especially Brandon Lee and Ernie Hudson. I definitely think that others are a little bit underutilised though, and I think that we could have seen a little bit more from them, but the performances overall are just right. I love the visuals, the sets, the costumes and makeup, the cinematography, the sound is great, both the sound design itself as well as that fantastic soundtrack. Yes, it does have a style and have elements that do echo a lot of other late 90s and early 2000s films, but the story, the characters and the overall gothic tone and style it embraces with open arms helps this stand out from the crowd. This is a very memorable film and I can completely understand why it's developed such a passionate fan base. And as for my recommendation, well, I don't think that The Crow will be for everyone, but I definitely recommend checking this movie out if you've never seen it before. If this looks appealing to you, I think you'll enjoy it. I certainly did. It met my expectations, it was a great experience overall, and I'm glad I finally got to see it. So with all that being said, my rating for The Crow is an 8 out of 10. Well, that is pretty much everything I want to say for this video, so if you have watched this video, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe and be sure to hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that is going on here. If you have seen The Crow, let me know down in the comments what you think about it, plus if you have any suggestions for any future Rewind reviews you would like to see me do, let me know down below. Dark City is one I'm going to have to check out one day. I know it's the same director as this movie, and it does look pretty cool from what it is that I've seen in the trailer, so I'm going to look into that one day. But until next time, thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you in the next video. See you guys.